Good evening, sleepy explorers. As the world outside settles into its nighttime hush and the stars begin their silent dance across the velvet sky, let us embark on a very special journey tonight. Not a journey across vast oceans or through towering mountains, but a journey back through time itself. We'll be visiting a time that feels both familiar and wonderfully mysterious, a time that holds a secret, tucked away like a forgotten treasure. Imagine for a moment that our long, winding river of history, flowing steadily from the very, very beginning of time, has a secret bend, a quiet, almost hidden stretch where the waters seemed to slow and the sunlight barely touched the surface. For many, many hundreds of years, it was as if this part of the river flowed in a gentle twilight, whispered about, but seldom truly seen. This period, nestled snugly between the grand days of the Roman Empire and the bright awakenings that came much later, is often called the Dark Ages. Now, please don't let that name Dark Ages stir any worries. It wasn't dark because of scary monsters or looming shadows in the forests. No. It was called dark because, in some ways, it seemed as though the bright lamps of learning, of grand building, and of bustling new ideas grew a little dim across Europe. It was as if this vast and wondrous continent simply took a very, very long, quiet nap. For nearly 1,000 years, the official story tells us there weren't many new inventions that shone brightly. Not many towering cathedrals reaching for the sky, and even the everyday records of people's lives became scarce, almost like pages torn gently from a very old, much-loved storybook. The vibrant hum of Roman cities softened, and the busy roads, once filled with chariots and merchants, began to be reclaimed by nature, green moss growing over ancient stones. But here, dear listener, is where our beautiful mystery truly begins. Think for a moment about the remarkable people who lived before this long, quiet nap. They were extraordinary. They built colossal structures that still stand today, like the magnificent Colosseums where stories unfolded, or the sturdy aqueducts that carried fresh water for miles to bustling cities. They understood the stars and planned their cities with astonishing wisdom and precision. Could such a clever and inventive continent truly just drift into such a long, deep slumber? Could all that bright knowledge simply vanish into thin air, like a wisp of smoke disappearing into the night, leaving no trace behind? This quiet question, this soft whisper of doubt, was the very first step in a grand journey of discovery for a clever and dedicated historian. Her name was Dr. Ilara Vance. She was a person who loved the soft rustle of old books more than almost anything and found comfort in the intricate patterns of forgotten maps and the faded ink of ancient chronicles. Dr. Ilara spent her days and many of her quiet nights poring over these ancient treasures, looking not for grand statements or bold pronouncements, but for tiny, almost invisible clues, threads that others might have overlooked simply because they weren't expecting to find them there. And as you drift deeper into comfort, we'll discover what those first tiny threads revealed to Dr. Ilara. They were whispers from the stars themselves, from the silent, unchanging heavens, hinting that perhaps our understanding of time and the long, quiet centuries might be a more intricate story than we ever dreamed. A story woven not just by events, but by careful hands. Imagine what it would be like to question the very calendar on your wall, to wonder if the year itself held a secret. That's where our journey takes us next, into the shifting sands of time. Dr. Ilara, with her quiet determination, began her search in the most precise of places, the vast, silent canvas of the night sky. She carefully examined old star charts, the very same ones ancient astronomers used thousands of years ago, to track the majestic dance of the planets and the awe-inspiring spectacle of eclipses. Eclipses, are like nature's own perfect clock, happening at very precise and predictable moments. So precise, in fact, that they can be used to mark time across vast stretches of history, like tiny glowing beacons in the darkness, unfailing in their cosmic rhythm. But as Dr. Ilara compared these ancient astronomical records from, say, a clever Roman scholar with the chronicles written by a medieval monk, she found something truly peculiar. The dates for these celestial dances, for the very same eclipse, didn't quite match up. It was as if the ancient Romans' clock and the medieval monk's clock were slightly out of sync. Sometimes it was off by a few days, sometimes by a few weeks, and sometimes it seemed to be off by entire decades or even a century. It was almost as if someone had subtly, cleverly shifted the calendar, adding a few extra moments, minutes, or even hundreds of years, until entire centuries seemed a little stretched, or perhaps a little squashed together in the historical timeline. Pause. 10 seconds. Let the profound idea settle gently. This wasn't just a simple mistake, like writing down the wrong day for your birthday. These were observations of the sun and moon, events that follow perfect, unchangeable rules of the cosmos. How could they be so consistently off in the records? It made Dr. Ilara wonder if the timeline itself, the very thread of history we follow from one event to the next, wasn't as straight and true as everyone believed. What if it had a few secret knots, or perhaps a few extra loops woven in, just to make it seem longer or different? What if centuries, perhaps even a total of 300 years, had been subtly added to our calendar, like quiet, invisible pages in the great book of time? This intriguing possibility is sometimes called the phantom time hypothesis. Then she turned her gentle gaze to the long, long list of spiritual leaders who guided the church through those quiet centuries, the popes. Imagine a very, very long family tree stretching back through time, generation after generation, a chain of succession meant to be unbroken. For such a long and sometimes turbulent period, filled with changes and challenges, the lineage of these spiritual leaders seemed remarkably unbroken, almost too perfect. Every name was there, in order, from the very earliest days. But when Dr. Ilara looked closely, seeking independent proof for each name, like a letter written by a different hand or a mention in a different country's record, she found that for many of the leaders in the middle of this quiet period, there was surprisingly little. Were all these leaders truly distinct, guiding their flock year after year, their lives bustling with activity? Or were some simply placed there on paper, like missing puzzle pieces gently filled in, just to create a smooth, continuous story of divine power and guidance, stretching back through a perfect, unbroken lineage? It was a tiny whisper of a doubt, like a secret wind rustling through the leaves, but it grew louder in her heart, like a hidden drumbeat, suggesting a grand, unseen design, a deliberate crafting of history to ensure a certain narrative of continuous authority. This idea that the very fabric of time might have been subtly altered, or that figures were carefully placed into history to complete a narrative, was a profound thought indeed. It suggested that the long, quiet nap of Europe might not have been natural at all. It might have been carefully curated. But why? What grand purpose could such a subtle yet enormous reshaping of time possibly serve? As you drift deeper into comfort, we'll next explore who might have been the primary keepers of these grand secrets and what astonishing treasures they held away from the world's knowing eye. Treasures that could truly reveal a different past. As Dr. Alara continued her gentle investigation, she began to understand that in those quiet centuries, after the grand Roman Empire had settled into slumber, a powerful new guardian arose in Europe. This was the Christian Church. It wasn't just a place of worship, it also became a grand storehouse of knowledge, perhaps the largest and most influential of its time. Imagine them gathering all the ancient books, all the precious scrolls filled with wisdom from Greece and Rome, and even from faraway lands, like priceless jewels gathered from scattered mines, carefully bringing them into their quiet monasteries and scriptoriums. They copied these ancient texts very carefully indeed. Monk after monk in silent monasteries spent their lives painstakingly replicating every word, every drawing by flickering candlelight. It was a monumental task, a labor of devotion and love for knowledge. But sometimes when copying, they also had a very important task. They decided what was most important to keep, and perhaps what was best left unmentioned, or even gently rephrased. Imagine having a giant library filled with countless stories, but being told that only certain people were allowed to read certain books, and sometimes even rewriting a few pages here and there, just to make the story flow better for everyone, to fit a grander, more unified narrative. This was a powerful way to shape what people knew and believed, to guide their understanding of the world. The church became like a vast, wise storyteller for an entire continent, sharing the tales that would guide its flock. And so, what we learned about history, about the universe, and about the very nature of truth often came through this very specific lens. If a story or a scientific discovery didn't quite fit the narrative being woven, it might not be copied, or it might be gently set aside, tucked away in a hidden corner of a monastery library, simply forgotten by most. Narrator. Dr. Ilara also found hints of books that were not copied, books that were deemed forbidden or even dangerous. These weren't scary books in the way a child might imagine, no, but perhaps they were ones that offered different perspectives on ancient beliefs or on the very early days of Christianity that didn't quite align with the singular, clear path the church wished to illuminate. Imagine a giant puzzle and someone deciding to hide a few pieces because they didn't quite fit the beautiful, unified picture they wanted to create. These hidden pieces, if found, could change the whole picture, revealing a much wider and more diverse tapestry of early human thought and belief. The church desired one clear guiding story, one path for everyone to follow, and anything that strayed from that path was often called heresy, a word that simply meant a very different and sometimes challenging idea to the established order. It made Dr. Alara wonder if the Dark Ages, this long, quiet nap, was not just a period of forgetting, but a period of very careful choosing. Choosing what stories to tell, what knowledge to preserve, and what to gently, quietly set aside in the shadows. This careful management of knowledge, this selective sharing of light, would prove to be one of the most profound powers held during those centuries. It was a power that guided the very understanding of reality for generations. And as your thoughts begin to drift, we'll next explore some incredible clues that surfaced from these careful choices, revealing hidden wonders that defied the very quiet of those centuries, suggesting a world far more advanced than the history books dared to whisper. These were not just whispers, but echoes of brilliance, waiting patiently to be heard again in the stillness of the night. As Dr. Alara continued her journey through old scrolls and maps, she stumbled upon something truly astonishing. Imagine holding a very old, faded map, drawn centuries ago. But on this map, you clearly see lands and coastlines that people supposedly discovered only much, much later, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of years later. It was as if these ancient mapmakers knew far more about the world than they were given credit for in the official story. Dr. Ilara found maps, for instance, that seemed to show the continent of Antarctica with its true shape long before any official explorer ever set foot there in modern times. And even more surprisingly, some seem to show it without its heavy blanket of ice, hinting at a time long, long ago when the world was different, a time before the ice stretched so far. How could ancient mariners have known such things if their world was supposed to be so limited, so lacking in global exploration? It felt like a deep secret waiting to be revealed. These maps were like secret messages from the past, hinting that ancient civilizations were far more connected and far more knowledgeable than the history books suggested for those quiet centuries. They were like finding a secret compartment in an old chest, revealing treasures you never knew existed, tucked away and preserved with immense care. But these incredible maps were often put aside, sometimes deep inside very secret vaults, or simply dismissed as fanciful drawings, never truly examined for the profound truths they might hold, because they didn't fit the accepted story. It wasn't just maps that defied time. Dr. Alara also read about strange, intricate machines that were discovered by archaeologists in old shipwrecks or buried cities. Imagine finding complex gears made of bronze, shaped with such precision that they could predict the exact movements of the stars and planets for years into the future. Or discovering simple batteries made of clay pots and copper that could generate electricity found in ancient sites from thousands of years ago. These weren't simple tools or basic contraptions. They were the creations of brilliant, inventive minds, far too advanced for the supposed Dark Ages, where people were thought to be only just beginning to rediscover basic ideas. These incredible inventions were often met with puzzlement in the official records, or when found by later archaeologists, they were sometimes dismissed as mere anomalies, or their true purpose was simply not understood. Why? Because they didn't quite fit the story of a world that was supposed to be primitive and unadvanced after the Roman Empire fell. If humans were capable of such sophistication then, what else did they achieve that was gently, quietly left out of our history books? It made Dr. Ilara feel like there was a whole secret story of human ingenuity waiting to be rediscovered, a story that defied the very concept of a long, dark period of ignorance. Dr. Ilara realized that the story she was uncovering was not just about time or maps or machines. It was about the power of knowledge itself, and how it can be shared or how it can be held close, influencing generations without their knowing. And as your thoughts begin to gently soften, we'll next learn about the silent watchers who kept these truths safe, waiting for the right moment to share them with the world, far away from the official storytellers. As Dr. Ilara delved deeper into the quiet corners of history, she learned about very special groups of people. These weren't the grand emperors or famous generals, nor were they the official scribes of the church. These were often humble monks or quiet scholars who worked within the vast network of monasteries across Europe. But their role, Dr. Ilara discovered, was far more profound than just copying books. They were also quietly, systematically collecting them. Imagine them as silent librarians traveling far and wide, through winding paths and over misty mountains, gathering every ancient manuscript they could find. Not just religious texts, but books on science, on philosophy, on engineering, on the stars, and even ancient travelogues. And then, instead of simply returning them to their original libraries, these precious scrolls and books were often sent to one central, highly secretive place. It was like a giant, quiet river, gathering all the scattered waters of knowledge into one enormous hidden lake, whose waters were shared only by a few. These special monks, belonging to orders like the Benedictines or later the powerful Jesuits, were like tireless bees, pollinating not with nectar, but with knowledge. They gathered the wisdom of the ancient world from distant lands and forgotten temples, and then, instead of letting it bloom freely for everyone, they brought it back, not for all eyes to see immediately, but for careful study and sometimes for safekeeping. It wasn't about losing knowledge, you see. It was about monopolizing it, deciding who had access and when. It was a quiet power, but a very, very strong one, shaping the flow of information across an entire continent. But not all knowledge was collected by official hands. Dr. Ilara also found whispers of very special, secret societies. Groups of people who met in hidden rooms, in quiet cellars beneath bustling cities, passing down wisdom that didn't fit the official story. These were groups like the Freemasons or the Rosicrucians, names you might hear whispered in old tales, sometimes associated with grand mysteries. They believed that the true wisdom of the past, the great discoveries of science, the ancient secrets of building, the deep philosophies of the soul, hadn't been lost at all. They were simply kept safe, like precious treasures locked away in a very secure vault, waiting for the right moment to be brought out again when the world was ready. These silent guardians, both within the official structures and in the secret corners, held onto the threads of a richer, more complex past. They were the unofficial librarians, the quiet keepers of forgotten flames, hoping one day that the true light of ancient knowledge could truly shine for everyone. And as your eyes grow heavy, we'll next learn about the ultimate vault where many of these secrets were gathered, a place shrouded in so much mystery that even sunlight has never reached its deepest chambers. This is where Dr. Ilara's journey would lead her, to the very heart of the unspoken millennia. As Dr. Ilara pieced together these intriguing clues, the shifting stars, the hidden maps, the silent collectors, and the whispers of secret societies, she began to see a grand pattern, like connecting tiny scattered constellations into a magnificent picture in the night sky. All these threads, she realized, led to one central monumental place. One place where history wasn't just written, but stored in its most complete, untouched form. A place so vast, so incredibly secret, so guarded that only a chosen few were ever allowed inside. This place was known as the Vatican Secret Archives. Imagine a castle, not built of stone and battlements like those you might see in fairy tales, but a castle built entirely of paper and parchment. Miles and miles of towering shelves stretching into the hushed darkness, each holding countless bundles of ancient scrolls and thick, heavy books. Every single letter, every grand decree, every small record ever made by the Church for hundreds and hundreds of years was said to be kept here. It was a place where time itself seemed to stand still, and every document held a breath from the past, waiting patiently. Most people only knew this place as a legend, a whispered tale among scholars, a place rumored to hold secrets that could rewrite the very story of humanity, secrets that could unravel centuries of belief and understanding. For Dr. Alara, it was more than a legend. It was the ultimate puzzle, the final piece to her great mystery. She felt a magnetic pull towards it, a deep knowing that the answers she sought were waiting there, patiently, in the quiet darkness, behind locked doors. But getting into such a place, even for a respected historian like Dr. Alara, was almost impossible. It was guarded not just by thick walls and strong doors, but by layers of tradition and centuries of unwavering secrecy. It was like trying to find a hidden doorway in a vast mountain, a doorway that no one believed existed, or that no one was allowed to speak of. Yet, the more she learned, the more she felt the immense weight of the unknown, the profound silence of those dark ages pressing on her, urging her to find a way to let the light in, to simply glimpse what lay within. It is said that inside this silent giant there are over 50 kilometers of shelving, stretching into the hushed distances, holding more than 1 million documents, a complete tapestry of paper spanning from the very early centuries to the present day. What the public knows, the documents that are occasionally made available, are just the tiniest tip of an enormous iceberg. The submerged part, the truly sensitive part, remains unseen, breathing quietly in the darkness, known only to a very select few. No pope has ever openly explored every single section. No cleric has revealed its deepest contents, and every detailed map of the archive's vast layout remains strictly, completely confidential. But whispers from those few who have glimpsed its edge suggest profound possibilities. Original manuscripts excluded from the Bible, perhaps offering different stories of ancient wisdom, secret records of lost knowledge, even ancient maps depicting the world in ways vastly different from what we are taught in our textbooks. Maps that would change our understanding of ancient travel and exploration. Yet what makes the Vatican Secret Archives so unique is not just the sheer volume of documents, but the very way they are held. Centuries ago, the word secretum in Latin didn't mean secret in the way we think of it today. It simply meant private. It was a clever linguistic shield, as if saying, we are not hiding, we are simply keeping it private. But if what you are keeping private includes the truth about vast stretches of human history, is it still just a private archive, or does it become something more, something that shapes the very reality of the world? And as you drift further into dreams, we'll next explore the precious hidden knowledge that might still lie perfectly preserved within those silent stone walls. Imagine documents that were not lost to the ravages of war, or damaged by time, or destroyed by fire. No, these were simply hidden, carefully, systematically, and with profound intention. Inside the Vatican Secret Archive, according to the scattered accounts from a very few scholars who were granted rare, limited access, there are ancient manuscripts that beautifully predate the Middle Ages, even the very birth of the Christian Church itself. These aren't myths or legends. They do not come from distant eastern lands that were completely unknown to Europe. No, these are the products of a vast body of knowledge that once existed right within Europe itself, before that light of knowledge was gently dimmed beneath the cloak of faith. Some of these manuscripts are said to be written in ancient languages not yet fully deciphered, perhaps a very early form of Latin, or even ancient Greek, whispering secrets from a distant past, waiting to be understood again. And what do they contain? Whispers suggest astonishingly accurate astronomical records, showing a deep understanding of the cosmos long before it was widely known. There are intricate anatomical diagrams of the human body, revealing a scientific curiosity and precision that far surpasses the worldview the Church would later emphasize, and profound philosophical reflections that invite deeper thought. Thoughts that might not quite align with the singular, structured path that was later presented to the world. Why are they hidden? Perhaps because they might gently conflict with the constructed order, the beautifully woven narrative that was presented to the world. If there were widespread proof that Europeans once possessed advanced knowledge, even during the so-called Dark Ages, then the entire narrative of one singular faith bringing all light back to a dark world might gently begin to unravel. If vast wisdom existed outside of the officially sanctioned texts, then the Church might feel its unique claim to sole authority over truth could be lessened. Imagine an ancient manuscript detailing complex geometry from the 4th century, long before it was supposed to be known, or another describing planetary motion along intricate elliptical orbits, concepts not publicly introduced until many centuries later. Perhaps a medical handbook from ancient Gaul, written in a mix of Latin and an old Celtic language, containing healing formulas that modern medicine still finds fascinating in their forgotten efficacy. These treasures were not forgotten, dear listener. They were gently, quietly concealed. And the strange thing is this: whenever someone happens to uncover a fragment, a passage, a single page of such hidden wisdom, someone always appears, very quietly, to retrieve it. Always under the gentle guise of cultural preservation or protecting the faithful from distortion. But truth, you see, doesn't need preservation in the shadows. It needs only to be free, to be seen, to be shared like sunlight. Yet the Vatican, acting as both guardian and gatekeeper, has given itself the gentle power to decide what may be revealed and what must remain dangerous. And dangerous here, perhaps, doesn't mean false, but rather too true, too soon. Perhaps no book in human history has been more carefully guided, more tightly controlled across the millennia than the Bible. More than just a sacred text for faith, it has served as the very foundation, the legal, political, and social framework for a vast spiritual empire stretching from the heart of Europe to the far lands of South America. Yet what few people realize is this: The Bible we read today is not a single untouched original that appeared fully formed. No, it is the beautiful result of a long, careful process of editing, selecting, including, and sometimes, very gently, excluding certain texts. The Vatican, holding the great wisdom of the Church, has never truly denied this, but it has also never fully explained why certain texts were excluded or what profound stories might unfold if they were released to the public. Scholars, with their quiet diligence, refer to these excluded writings as apocrypha. Now, the word apocryphal here doesn't mean false or untrue. It simply means these writings were not permitted to circulate widely, not to be read in church, and not included in the official beloved collection of the Bible. Among them are powerful and intriguing texts: the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, the mysterious Book of Enoch, and even the Gospel of Judas Iscariot. These writings often present a very different, very human image of Jesus, not just as a distant supernatural figure, but as a wise, spiritual teacher, gently calling for inner awakening and urging people to seek the truth within themselves rather than depending solely on any external religious institution. If such teachings were widely accepted, what then of the Church's special role, its unique position as the intermediary, the gentle bridge between humankind and the divine? Some of these texts go even further, speaking of human history long, long before Adam and Eve, describing cycles of destruction and rebirth on earth, or referencing the existence of beings of light, not part of our visible world. Such ideas, beautiful in their own way, might stand in gentle contrast to the creation doctrine the Vatican has held so steadfastly for thousands of years, a doctrine that presents a more singular, linear view of beginnings. And so, rather than allowing these texts into wider academic discussion, they were quietly, gently stamped as heretical, not to be printed, not to be taught, not to be discussed openly. For centuries, simply possessing a copy of one of these texts could lead to grave consequences, a quiet redirection from the path. Even more telling, many of these very texts were later discovered in ancient monasteries, secretly copied by devoted monks, as if they knew that one day the complete truth, in all its beautiful diversity, would need to be told. Today, although some of these works have been respectfully declassified and republished, the Vatican still chooses to remain silent on their full doctrinal value. They invoke sacred tradition, a beautiful and ancient concept. Yet with each passing day, the question becomes a little more obvious. If these writings were truly without worth, why hide them so well? Perhaps what is most carefully guarded is not that people will believe these ancient words, but that people will simply start asking their own gentle questions. And in history, every true awakening has always begun with a question that seemed, at first, utterly harmless. Not every war is fought on the battlefield, dear listener. Some wars are far more silent, with no swords or shields, yet capable of shaping entire civilizations for centuries. These are the wars waged against ideas, where the gentle enemy is knowledge itself, when it seeks to bloom in unexpected ways outside of the carefully tended garden. Throughout the Middle Ages, and especially during the so-called Dark Ages, anyone who dared to question official doctrine, explore forbidden subjects, or even simply dared to be too curious, risked being branded a heretic. And for that quiet crime, the consequences were never light. One of the most striking examples is Giordano Bruno, a brilliant philosopher and cosmologist. He was a Dominican friar, a man of deep faith, but he believed so profoundly in the greatness of creation that he could not accept that the universe had only one center. He taught that there were countless worlds, countless suns, that God's wonder could not be confined to what was written in Scripture alone. For these very ideas, he was tragically burned alive in 1600 in Rome's Campo dei Fiori, amidst prayers and the cold silence of the ecclesiastical court, a somber moment in the history of ideas. Bruno was just one of thousands, known and unknown. Monks who dared to translate ancient manuscripts that offered different perspectives. Researchers in ancient medicine who explored remedies beyond traditional ones. Astronomers and historians who sought truths that didn't quite align with the established narrative. Anyone who touched knowledge that had not been officially approved all risked charges of heresy. They were sometimes tried in secret courts where no outward evidence was needed, only accusation. Sentences ranged from lifelong imprisonment to gentle but firm pressure for repentance, or, in the direst cases, burning at the stake, a ritual believed to purify the soul. People often speak of the Inquisition as an era of religious terror, but perhaps it's more profound to see it as one of the most sophisticated machines ever built to gently guide and shape intellectual thought, eliminating dissent before it could truly take root. It sought to guide not only individuals, but also ideas. Books were burned, manuscripts erased. Truth itself was, in a way, extinguished before it could spread freely. Many works were sentenced to die with their authors. A book that took 20 years to write could be reduced to ashes in mere minutes, leaving no visible trace behind. More terrifying still, the long silence that followed made future generations believe those works had never existed at all. In such an atmosphere, silence meant survival. Questioning meant gentle redirection from the path. And over time, silence itself became a form of subtle agreement, allowing an entire continent to drift into a slumber of knowledge that lasted for centuries. The Vatican, wielding its profound influence as both spiritual authority and keeper of knowledge, had no need to prove it was right. It only needed to gently maintain control, to guide those who were too awake. And that was enough to keep certain truths nested quietly in the darkness, awaiting a different time. This delicate dance between knowledge and control shaped not just what people knew, but how they thought, influencing the very path of science itself. Consider Galileo Galilei, centuries later, peering through his simple telescope. When he declared that the Earth revolved around the sun, he wasn't just stating a scientific fact. He was gently, unintentionally, challenging an entire worldview. A worldview that had been carefully constructed over centuries, where humankind believed it was the unmoving center of the universe. For this, he was guided to recant his findings, not because they were false, but because they gently shifted a long-held narrative. And as your dreams begin to gently weave, we'll next explore the subtle, powerful role of everyday education in shaping memory, and how even our modern textbooks carry echoes of this ancient story, sometimes without us ever knowing. In every great society, control over weapons or wealth is never the ultimate goal. The truest and most enduring form of power is the gentle ability to shape how people think, right from their earliest days. And to guide thought, you don't always need to force. You simply need to leave people with little else to think about. When history falls into the hands of a select few, and knowledge is shared drop by drop only from approved pulpits, the public mind gradually empties. They do not question, not because they are forbidden to, but because they no longer know what is worth questioning, or how to even begin. It was during the so-called Dark Ages that a vast mechanism of mental cultivation silently took hold. It was not a harsh extinguishing, but a gentle dimming of the flame of awareness by carefully reducing the fuel of expansive knowledge. In the monasteries, monks copied the Bible endlessly, their pens scratching softly in the quiet. But they did not copy the works of Aristotle, Archimedes, or Ptolemy, unless those works perfectly served the guiding doctrine, the story they wished to tell. In the churches, the faithful were gently taught about sin, about heaven and hell, and about the path to salvation. But they were rarely taught about the intricacies of social structure, the broader tapestry of true history, or the profound power of language beyond Scripture. Generation after generation grew up with only one singular vision of the world, that they were humble sinners, and that only the Church held the secret key to their salvation. And so, in this gentle shaping, a kind of faith emerged from a quiet acceptance. Those who knew little were often seen as devout. Those who asked too many questions were sometimes seen as gently misguided or even dangerous. Knowledge itself ceased to be seen as noble for all. It became a sign of arrogance, sometimes even heresy. It must be emphasized, this was not a natural state of unknowing. It was engineered wisdom, carefully cultivated, quietly maintained, and gently protected. In many regions, the ability to read was reserved for a select few. For centuries, only the clergy were allowed to read. Even monks, in some instances, were denied full access to the complete Bible, taught only those portions deemed most appropriate for their path. The Church did not need to oppress every nation with harsh rule. It only needed to keep the world gently shrouded in a fog of unknowing. And when you live your entire life in a soft, guiding fog, you will truly believe that it is the only light that exists. This is why the journey to cultivate the mind did not happen overnight. It was a process spanning centuries, subtle, nonviolent, coercion-free. All it required was time, silence, and for no one to truly remember that there had ever been another time, another world, where asking questions was not just allowed, but celebrated. And the most haunting part is this: when gentle unknowing becomes the norm, the one who knows too much is seen as the outcast. The world falls into a gentle cycle. And when the Vatican holds the keys to both memory and the future, it need say nothing at all. It only needs to remain silent, allowing us all to continue to live in a dream where truth has been gently replaced by comfort, and light is something you are only allowed to see when someone permits it. But tonight, dear listener, you have walked through the hidden corridors of time and seen the gentle light of truth begin to shine. Now, with a mind full of wonder and a heart at peace, drift into the softest of slumbers, knowing that the journey of discovery continues, even in our dreams.